Why, hello there, everyone. My name is Justin, but you can call me J-Swag, and welcome to episode 4 of the podcast, Sports Talk with Swag. Appreciate you coming by and listening to another episode. Not really going to take up much of your time. We're just going to get right into this one. But again, just wanted to thank you all for taking a listen to this episode and checking out this podcast. It definitely means a lot to me. Again, if you have any feedback for me or anything that you would like for me to talk about, please get in touch with me, and I would be happy to listen to any feedback that you have for me. So without further ado, let us get right into it. Okay, so for the topic for tonight's podcast, there's only one topic, and that topic is Chris Paul. So if you guys don't care about the NBA or Chris Paul, you can go ahead and click away now because that's all we'll be talking about tonight. But I do hope that you stay tuned and give it a little listen to see what I have to say about it and hear my thoughts on it. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well after I'm done here. But yeah, so let's get right on into it. So for those of you who don't know, earlier this morning, Chris Paul was traded to the Houston Rockets from the Los Angeles Clippers, where he has spent the last 6 years playing. Technically, this trade is not official because nothing can happen in free agency until July 1st. So this is technically all just verbal agreements, but I mean it's kind of a gentleman's agreement. So it's if it's been verbally agreed to, it will go through. Except for, of course, the case last year when the Mavericks verbally agreed to a deal with DeAndre Jordan, but then he was persuaded otherwise by his teammates to, once the time came, not agree to that deal and instead actually re-sign with the Clippers. But I have I don't think that's going to happen in this situation. But anyways, I digress. So let me just go through the specifics of this trade. So the Rockets will be getting Chris Paul, and in turn, the Clippers will be getting Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, Sam Decker, Montrezl Harrell, DeAndre Liggins, a couple of other potentially these smaller details haven't officially been ironed out yet, but potentially then a couple of more pretty small no-name guys from other teams around the league that the Rockets then traded for after this Chris Paul trade went through, just to match the salary that would be coming over on his contract. And they also traded a 2018 first-round pick, which is protected if it's in the top 3 for next year's draft. So essentially, this is not like a typical trade per se, since it is in the off season. It's not just a free agent signing either. So basically, this is what we call a sign and trade. So basically, Chris Paul had 1 year left on his contract with the Clippers. And it's called a player option. So he opted out of his contract, or he was going to opt out of it actually on July 1st and become a free agent. So basically, if he was going to opt out, he could then talk to any team and sign with any team that he wanted to in the off season. So he met with a couple of teams. He met with the Rockets, the Spurs. I believe he was going to meet with the Nuggets. I'm not sure if he actually did meet with them. But he decided that he was going to sign with the Rockets in the offseason. But he was actually then, I think, either persuaded or he realized it was a better idea for the sign and trade. So essentially what he did is he actually opted into his contract, and he was guaranteed $24.2 million in this upcoming season. So he's opted into that, and he will then be traded by the Clippers to the Rockets for all those players I mentioned earlier. And there's a couple reasons for for Chris Paul and the Clippers to agree to this. One is for Chris Paul, it allows him, he basically keeps the contract that he had. So he's guaranteed the $24.2 million next season. And he's basically only guaranteeing the Rockets that he'll play with them 1 year. So after next season, he can decide either he can re-sign with the Rockets for what's called a Supermax deal, which he could get 5 years, $205 million. Or if he decides he doesn't want to re-sign with him, it didn't go well or whatever, he can then still sign a max contract with any other team, which would be, at the most, it would be 4 years, $152 million. And the reason that the Clippers would want to do this is because it allows the Clippers then to get some young prospects in return, like Sam Dekker and Montrezl Harrell and people like that, in return for trading Chris Paul, as opposed to him just opting out in going into free agency and then them just losing him and getting nothing in return, if that makes sense. So he was kind of almost, in the sense of him, setting himself up to get a max contract next year. He also was kind of doing the Clippers a favor, doing them a solid so that they could get, some players in return, and some young and promising players too. Sam Dekker didn't play a ton of minutes, but he did play some good, meaningful minutes with the Rockets last year, and he's a great prospect. He was a great player at Wisconsin in college, so I have high hopes for him. I think he'll do well over there, as well as Montrezl Harrell. He's a great big man as well. So the Clippers definitely got some good players in return. So they definitely, it's nothing like the Jimmy Butler trade where they're kind of just getting nothing in return. They're actually getting some good returns. But yeah, so those are the basics of the trade and the contracts deals and whatnot. So let's go over kind of the why, because this was something that I did most of my research on today, because I was pretty shocked when I got the alert. For those of you who don't know, Chris Paul is my favorite player. I followed him pretty much since I started following the NBA, probably about just about 10 years ago. And he's always been my favorite player. I've been a huge fan of whatever team he's been on. So I was a Hornets fan, and then I became a Clippers fan. And unfortunately now I may actually become a Rockets fan, but we'll see about that, and we'll talk about that later. But anyways, so it was pretty much expected that Chris Paul would opt out of his contract along with Blake Griffin, and it was pretty much expected that Chris Paul would just opt back in and sign a Supermax 5-year, $205 million extension with the Clippers, and pretty much finish his career out there, and just kind of stay there. And Blake Griffin, would maybe resign, maybe go somewhere else, which I was expecting. And everyone knew that Chris Paul was taking meetings with other teams. A lot of people thought it was just a ploy, and kind of just to get leverage on the Clippers to make sure that they did give him that max deal and kind of give him what he wanted. But apparently he was very legitimately meeting with these teams and talking with them, and was, sold on the Rockets and decided to sign with them. So it was pretty unexpected, and it's a big trade too, because now a lot of people are now calling the Rockets a super team, with having a backcourt of Chris Paul and James Harden together, which will definitely be in competition for being one of the best backcourts in the NBA. Definitely giving Steph and Klay Thompson a run for their money. But so there's a couple of reasons actually that I found in my research, for kind of the why Chris Paul decided to leave the Clippers to go to the Rockets. So let's dig into a couple of those. So the first one is actually, surprisingly to some people, which I know it was for me, because of Jerry West. For those of you who don't know, Jerry West has been an executive with the Warriors for the past few years, and he just a couple weeks ago signed a deal with the Clippers to do the same thing with them. And basically, he's, his kind of goal with the Warriors when he signed with them was to kind of take them as a team from obscurity and, kind of running in the same place and, getting to the playoffs, but never too far into them, and take them to a championship contender and a championship team. And they've won 2 championships in the last 3 years and have the best record of all time as well. So he definitely knows what he's doing, and I think he kind of saw that his work was complete with the Warriors, and they now have a dynasty over there, and he said, all right, what's up next? Let me find a different team. And he chose the Clippers. And one thing that he has said since the get-go is that he didn't want to, quote-unquote, run it back. In essence, he didn't just want to bring the same team back from last year and just try it over again. I believe I mentioned this in an earlier podcast, but I mean, it basically then goes to the definition of its insanity of you're trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's kind of what the Clippers were doing. They kept bringing the same team back, the same core of Chris Paul, JJ Redick, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan. And pretty much like a rotating small forward. And they weren't getting the job done. They were getting to the playoffs every year. They were getting a 50-win team every year, but they couldn't get past the second round. And in a lot of situations, they could have, and they should have. So a lot of disappointing finishes to seasons for the Clippers these past few years. And I guess, understandably, when Jerry West signed this deal, he was like, listen, we're not going to get anywhere with the same team, so let's change it up a little bit. And I think that that definitely influenced Chris Paul's decision, because I think he was definitely feeling the same way, and he had that same mindset of, I've been on this team for 6 years, we've gone to the playoffs 6 years, and we've never made it out of the second round. So I think he was kind of tired of that and tired of kind of just spinning his wheels in place. So, it makes sense. Chris Paul leaving helps them do this and helps them, now start kind of to rebuild, really, which a lot of people are starting to think that they will do. And I will actually, touch on that a little bit later, but I just wanted to get to the other big reason of why Chris Paul left the Clippers, which another thing that just came out today, actually, which I think was, kind of leaked today, but also kind of people are paying more attention to. But another big reason of why Chris Paul left was, at this point, according to some execs and some sources, Chris Paul actually despises, and that was a specific word that was used, is that he despises Doc Rivers, and which may come as a shock to some people, but may make some sense. So let me just unpack this for you guys here real quick. So basically, to kind of, rewind all the way so that this makes full sense and to give the full context, Doc Rivers, a few years back, made a questionable trade and a controversial trade to get Austin Rivers on the Clippers. He traded for Austin Rivers so he could get him on his team, which is his son. And Austin Rivers, was a good player at Duke his 1 year that he was there, but didn't really translate and hasn't fully translated into the NBA since he's been in the NBA for the past couple of years. He definitely showed some signs of potential this past year, but it just didn't really fully make sense, that trade. It was kind of trading down, and a lot of people were saying, okay, it kind of looks like Doc Rivers is just trading here to get his son on his team, which now looks to be more apparent that it was, because apparently Doc Rivers was giving pretty extreme favoritism and unfair treatment to his son, Austin, throughout the years in the season, and that was taking a toll on a lot of the other players on the team. There was reports of during practices and drills and even games for mishaps and mistakes and things that that Doc Rivers would be riding on the players for and screaming and yelling at them and berating them for it. He was saying nothing to Austin Rivers for the same thing, which to me is a pretty clear sign of nepotism. He just was never yelling at Austin, was never giving him a hard time for his mistakes. And apparently he also refuses to trade him. There are reports now, according to different sources, that this past season the Knicks offered to trade Carmelo Anthony and Sasha Vujacic to the Clippers for Jamal Crawford, Paul Pierce, and Austin Rivers. And I think if you are an NBA fan, or if you are any sort of an NBA exec, any other team, any other NBA exec would accept this trade in a heartbeat, especially for the team that it would create. Finally giving the Clippers a solid, good, small forward that they need, who can play both ends. Carmelo's not a stellar defender, but he is a defender, and he can score at will. And complement that with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan, and man, you have yourself a super team there. But Doc Rivers declined it. Didn't really even give it much thought, apparently, and just immediately said nope. He did not want to trade his son. And Chris Paul, kind of at that point is saying to himself, and apparently had the mindset, according to people, that it was, okay, Doc now values having his son on his team and being with his son more than winning and putting together a quality winning team. And that's just kind of unacceptable. And for someone like Chris Paul, you don't want to play for an organization like that, especially moving forward into the future. If you're going to be valuing, having your son on your team more than being a championship contender, you're not going to have a lot of people wanting to play for you, especially someone who's, starting to get past their prime and is just really focused and concentrated on winning a championship. And, Chris Paul didn't see it there in LA with, Doc being at the helm. And apparently it really deteriorated their relationship and deteriorated the team a lot. It was said that Austin Rivers also just had a sense of pretty high self-entitlement as soon as he got to the team. And it just really rubbed a lot of the players the wrong way, especially the vets, which just didn't bode well. And it's finally coming to light now. So, which now leads me then to go back to how this will affect the rest of the team. We have already heard from JJ Redick, who is a free agent. He said he has no interest in re-signing with the Clippers now, so he will be going elsewhere. And Blake Griffin is also a free agent, and I would not be surprised to see him go somewhere else now. A lot of people are saying Boston, which I would love to see him go there. I think a lot of people would. They're a big play for him, but there are definitely a lot of other options out there for Blake Griffin. And it wouldn't surprise me at this point for him to go to a different team, because with these same problems that Chris Paul is having, and he can get, just as much money anywhere else, not a lot of draw for Blake Griffin to come back to the Clippers. And even those that are on the team, like, DeAndre Jordan was said to be on the trading block on draft night. Will they end up trading him too and just try to completely rebuild? Will we see him go somewhere else? Really wouldn't surprise me at this point to kind of see the Clippers blow up. A lot of people are saying with Chris Paul leaving today, we're seeing the start of the breakup of the Clippers, which a lot of people thought was inevitable and was coming. I thought it was inevitable and I thought it was coming, and here it is. It's upon us, and it's happening. One of the other questions that a lot of people are having is, while in theory, it sounds great to have a backcourt of Chris Paul and James Harden. It's definitely questionable because a lot of what they do is ball dominance, and they both demand the ball and command with it, and their teams run through them having the ball. Especially James Harden playing point guard last year and running the team and having all the plays run through him. And he had an MVP caliber season, and the Rockets really turned it around, and they were, I think, either a 3 or a 4 seed in the playoffs. And, they didn't have a great outing in the playoffs, though. But nevertheless, he had a great season. I think actually the best offensive season in NBA history. Last year, he was, I think, number 1 in assists and number 2 in points. So he had a great season, and he was, it was different with him being point guard, and it was an experiment, but I think it kind of worked. But now you're bringing in the acclaimed point god to run the team now. So a lot of people are interested to see how they'll do it. I mean, especially because there was a stat I saw earlier today which showed that James Harden was second last year in the league with he had the second most touches, he had the third most time of possession, and the third most passes, while Chris Paul had the 8th most touches, the 7th most time of possession, and the 4th most passes. So they both really like to have the ball and have the plays work through them. But we have seen this before. A lot of people were questioning, this past year how the Warriors would be able to do it. Even just previously with having Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, all these offensive-minded players together, how would they share the ball? And then when they added Kevin Durant, who's a big playmaker himself too, even more questions came about, but they made it work and had a season for the ages. They lost 1 game in all of the playoffs. So the big thing here is that if the Rockets, they traded for the point god, they traded for Chris Paul, one of the best point guards ever, they will make it work. And if they don't make it work, he will go somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? Because they traded specifically, it's not like they just traded for someone and it's like he shows up and it's like, oh, he, demands having the ball and runs the ball through. He has all the plays run through him. They knew what they were getting into, so they need to have a plan to make it work. But I'm excited to see how it works. Apparently, Chris Paul was quote unquote determined to play with Harden. And he was actually very excited by the idea of actually being able to play off the ball more and share the point guard minutes with Harden, kind of share that position with him. So that would be very interesting. We've never really seen Chris Paul in the 2 guard position before, other than maybe in an All-Star game or in the Olympics, where he would have been playing with Harden as well. But I'm very interested to see how this works because, they are 2 ball dominant players, but they're also 2 excellent players and 2 excellent ball sharers. They both were in the top 4, I think, or 5 in assists last year in the league. So it'll be very interesting to see how it goes. I'm excited to see how it goes. It should definitely shake up the West a little bit. You'll probably, especially depending on what Blake Griffin does, but you'll probably see the Clippers fall pretty far from playoff contention. I think we'll see the Timberwolves up in playoff contention now. And, we'll see what some of the other teams do in the offseason. But it just made things very, very interesting for next year and the next few years, actually. But yeah, so I'm excited to see how this shapes up, and how this all works for the Rockets, and excited to see what Blake Griffin does now in free agency, and how other teams respond, and just how the season shapes up next year. But yeah, so let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about this trade. Let me know who you think won the trade. Did the Rockets or the Clippers get the better deal out of it? How do you think Chris Paul and James Harden will fare on the same team? And do they pose a threat to the Warriors? I think they will. I think we may see the Warriors and the Rockets in the conference finals next year, but I think we still see the Warriors continue to dominate for the next 3 or 4 years, honestly. I don't think anyone's going to be giving them a run for their money, no matter what kind of super team they're able to put together. But, I mean, supposedly the Rockets aren't done, and they're still trying to acquire either Carmelo Anthony or Paul George, which could be very, very interesting. I think it's a lot more likely that they land Carmelo Anthony because he actually had a meeting with them a few years ago when he was in free agency. He met with the Rockets, along with the Bulls and the Lakers and whatnot. So I'm interested to see. I think there's a lot more likelihood that Carmelo ends up on the Rockets than Paul George. I think Paul George, regardless, will end up somewhere else by the end of, by the middle of the season. Sorry, I should say the trade deadline next year. He will not be a Pacer, but I digress. So let me know what you guys think, your thoughts on this whole trade thing. But yeah, let me know. Other than that, again, I just want to thank you guys for giving it a listen and for checking this podcast out. And see you guys in the next episode. Peace.